afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Top 7 Predictions and How to Position Your Home Improvement Business for Success. My name is Michelle Letman, and I'm the content and media producer here at Surefire Local. I'm joined by our webinar ninja, Steve Eastlack, who is ready and excited to help answer your questions. And not only do we have Steve here, but we also have a full house right here in our very own webinar room. We have Blake from sales, Jenny from marketing, and our Chief Marketing Officer, Shashi. Speaking of those questions, you can communicate with us using the question box in your webinar control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Why don't you go ahead and see if you can locate that right now and let us know where you're joining us from today. We'll be sending messages and discussion questions to the group throughout the webinar, so be sure to check that out. Before we get into your business, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how Surefire Local started and how the story behind how the Surefire Local Marketing Cloud is the marketing solution that works as hard as you do. It all started with a small business owner who taught his son the value of hard work. That son, our founder and CEO, Chris, went on to lead several venture-backed Web 2.0 startups, but he never forgot the memories of watching his dad get up early in the morning to track down new business. He wondered if there was a way for 21st century technology to multiply the efforts of small local companies like his father's. Turns out there was. Surefire Local started with an idea, a way to help small businesses rank higher in search engines. Today, it's an unbeatable marketing engine backed up by expert consultants with one mission: help local businesses generate new business by getting discovered online. The Surefire Local Marketing Cloud allows you to do three things: see more, do more, and get more help. Over the years, we've had the privilege of working alongside hundreds of local companies and watching many of them double and triple their leads with Surefire Local. Some call it a digital marketing transformation, but we just call it hardworking marketing for hardworking people. Today, one lucky attendee is going to take home a Google Home mini speaker. We'll be announcing the winner at the end. If you don't win one, though, you don't have to go home empty-handed. Everyone here today is eligible to get Mark's book, Fit to Grow, but I will get more to that later on. Today, we have Mark G. Richardson, leading authority in the remodeling industry and author of 3 books. So for now, I'm going to pass it on over to Mark. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, and thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. Our topic today is, one of those that is especially important this time of the year as we come into the new year, how to go about predicting and thinking about, but most importantly, how to position your business. As I really work with and coach some of the leading businesses, one of the things I'm most, impressed about and put kind of more value in is how well they predict and how well those predictions ultimately come true. I am not a psychic and I don't have a crystal ball, but I do truly believe that 80% of this is really more of a science and 20% is more of an art. So what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to first and foremost help you to understand a little bit more of the science, a little bit more of the kind of stars and planets, so to speak, out there. Mostly things that are more objective. However, there are also things from my perspective, since I touch and I'm involved with so many different things, a little bit more subjective and experiential. Then I'm going to give you some framework of how to go about kind of creating some themes and positioning, this process. And then I'm going to kind of wrap up and get involved with some more specific predictions. When I originally put this podcast together on predictions that are coming into this year, I kind of looked at them as very much standalone predictions. However, what I'm going to try to do is weave those positioning and predictions in together so that you not only have why the possibilities of what's happening from a predictions out there, but also I think you have some of the tactics in terms of what to do about those things. So, I love this little quote from Yogi Berra, and I've certainly used it in the past in different things I've talked about, and that is, the future ain't what it used to be. The reality is this notion of predicting and thinking about the future and the level of change and the speed at which things are happening out there today, it's just not what it used to be. I look back, starting in this industry, coming out of the roots into architecture and then into remodeling back in the late 70s and early 80s. We, at that time, had about 7 to 10 years to adjust and change. We got up into the 90s and we had more like 3 to 5 years. We got up into 2000, it was more 2 to 3 years. And now, literally, if you're not changing and adjusting within a 1 year period, that speed of change is just as important in many cases at what the change is. Many of you, I think, have heard the adage, the road to hell is paved by good intentions. Change kind of the word hell and paved by the road to failure is paved by good intentions. So, what I'm really saying, I guess, as much as anything in this kind of little slide here is that, it's really critical as you're listening to these things, not just to savor them and kind of sit under a tree and reflect on them, but it's really your success is more a product of what you do with what the ideas that you think about and what you hear today, not necessarily the ideas themselves. Intentions without actions equal squat. So I really would encourage you, again, if you're going to take the time to listen to this, that you really commit to doing what's necessary to kind of get in shape in terms of your business and make the moves that are critical. So let me start with some of the facts and figures, some of the environmental things that are out there. I think everybody remembers kind of experiencing the crash in 2008. Well, that was, in fact, almost 10 years ago. I think the reality is as we got out of that, we kind of grew and grew and grew into moving from surviving to thriving, and survival kind of mentality in business is very, very different than thriving mentality. But the reality is we can talk about this from a kind of an emotional or motivational level, but let's kind of look at more of the facts and figures. When we think about, kind of the dynamic in the industry, construction categories are not created equal. When we hit the wall in 2008, new construction dropped off actually by about 75%. It has very high peaks and very low valleys. Bigger type of remodeling, for most companies dropped off 30 to 40%. Specialty and kitchen and bath remodeling dropped off. So as you think about kind of what's happening out there in the marketplace and trying to predict to the future, obviously we're in kind of the growing kind of peaks here, and we're seeing a pretty good runway in terms of 2019 or 2018 and 2019. So, we do have some space here to really work. But think about what those key drivers are. Those key drivers are what influences, I think, the homeowners as much as anyone out there to really respond. So, what I oftentimes do when I start the year, I think about what these key drivers are. And the reality is for the last 10, 20 years, they've been the same key drivers. What's different is whether the arrows are up or down. So let's just talk about in a little bit more of a data-driven way what some of those kind of key drivers are in terms of influencing how we predict. The first is home appreciation. Needless to say, in most of the markets around the United States, home appreciation continues to be strong. Now, strong doesn't mean a frenzy like we were experiencing in the go-go times in 2003, 2004. Matter of fact, those go-go times are in large part what kind of got us in trouble, and that's where we saw the bubble go, in 2007, 2008. But home appreciation continues to be very strong, and I think the arrow is pointing up, which bodes very well for certainly home improvement spending. The second is interest rate. Interest rates continue to be at kind of almost historic lows, which needless to say, homeowners out there, regardless whether they're using financing or not, this is an important element because if they're not using financing, it means probably their mortgage and other spending that they're doing has lower interest rates, which allows them to spend a little bit more. If they are using a type of financing, it's favorable certainly for them to do things. Now, what's interesting about interest rates, most of the economists are predicting a little bit of creepage up in terms of interest rate this year. However, the interest rates going up actually is beneficial to home improvement because it will hurt housing a bit, but it creates urgency for clients to act on home improvement. The third element out there is employment or unemployment. Matter of fact, oftentimes when you combine some of these key indicators like home appreciation and unemployment, it's almost exponential in terms of positive. Well, most of your potential clients out there have a job. So it's not so much, even in the worst of times, 8 or 9 out of 10 have a job. However, when we usually get up into double-digit unemployment, what happens is people get nervous. And people are not nervous about having their job today, but they are nervous about whether they'll have it a year from now. And that does paralyze some of the spending. So another driver that's important out there is unemployment. Housing is also a good driver, a good indicator for home improvement. Today, there's still a thirst and a demand for much, much greater amount of housing out there than, in fact, we can build in this country. And as a result of that gap that's created, that creates a good environment for the home improvement market. Another and a fifth indicator in this, which is really, I think, certainly an important one, and that's the stock market. And the reality is, since the crash, the stock market, the Dow in particular, has gone up about 400% in that period of time. So you really think about that, it's created kind of a wealth effect out there. Whether people are interested in investing or confidence in the stock market is really something different than the fact that it is, in fact, much, much higher than it was in the past and continues to kind of move forward. Now, all these things combined together really create what is the biggest driver for home improvement, and that is consumer confidence. You know, those that have been involved in home improvement know that when consumer confidence is strong, homeowners are spending. And when they're spending in their greatest asset, being their home, that creates, I think, an environment that's very positive. So you look at all of these things, and you have to ask yourself, okay, are these arrows pointing up on every single one of these, or are they down? The reality is they're all up. And when they're all up, you have to ask yourself, is this a time to grow, or is it a time to kind of hunker down? And I would argue, you know, we have a very nice tailwind out there. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but we have a very nice tailwind out there. And I would say one of the biggest predictions is we're going to see a lot of very nice growth in terms of the opportunities out there for you in 2018. Now, the reality is, even if you have a lot of opportunities, doesn't mean that you're coming into 2018 with the same kind of business. You know, I learned many years ago that businesses kind of fall into 3 categories. Those sort of businesses that are more challenged, businesses that are doing okay, and businesses that are out there rocking and rolling. And as you kind of think about that as you move into 18, if you're in more of a rebuilding mode, more of a rethinking, recruitment, kind of getting back to basics, that might be what you need to focus on. In 2018, if you're more of in an enhancement mode, then it's much more about looking at how do I strengthen the team and the product? How do I improve the sales and the production processes? How do I become a little bit more laser focused on the client? Or if you're in a massive growth mode, if you're positioned especially well and you really want to put the pedal down, it might be much more of a time that you think in terms of aggressive but controlled growth. You might be thinking about, you know, what kind of products and services can I expand to in 2018 and 19, and how do I leverage many of the strategic relationships that are out there? So I, over the last 5-10 years, have been kind of looking at and watching some of the best out there. And what I'm finding is one common denominator when it comes to successful businesses out there, as you think about predicting and positioning for the future. The first one is you've got to have the right mindset. You know, a lot of the things I'm talking about in terms of all these arrows going up, you know, they create obviously kind of a positive mindset. You got to believe if in fact you're going to get there. You know, you also have to realize mindset is about work ethic. Just because the arrows are pointing up doesn't mean it's easy or it's not going to be hard work. Mindset is also about pace of business today. Things are happening very quickly, so you have to move fast. The second kind of puzzle piece or ingredient that I see for success is you've got to be fundamentally fit. The best of the best businesses out there, those businesses that you're really excited about, that you would want to invest in, whether you're part of the business or not, are businesses that are in shape. We're in times today that we're out there kind of climbing the Rocky Mountains, not strolling through the Shenandoah. And because of that business, you have to be in shape in business. Now, I wrote a book, How Fit Is Your Business, specifically because I think for the most part, many of the remodeling businesses, home improvement business, they kind of dove into getting in business and they don't really know what business fitness is. So I encourage you to try to understand what fitness is and then try to build it and really question and ask yourself, are you a fit business? And the third element, I think, is probably more important than others, and that is the subject of change. A friend of mine said years ago at an award ceremony, if a business is not changing, it will become irrelevant. And that really hit a chord for me because that's the ultimate, I think, insult, not only for a business, but certainly for a business leader. So as you look at these three things, mindset, fitness, and change, these are puzzle pieces that kind of fit together if you're going to be positioned and successful moving forward. You can have a gung-ho mindset, singing kumbaya with your team members, but fumbling around in your fitness and you're going to fail. You can be kind of a change artist, always looking for new ways of doing things, always having the right mindset, but you don't have the blocking and tackling and fitness down, and you're going to fail. You need all three of these ingredients kind of fitting together to make, I think, a successful meal really for the future. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about change, because I think everybody knows and thinks about what change is, but they don't necessarily, I think, fundamentally adjust to the kind of level of change that's needed out there. So 20 years ago, technology clearly was an option, where there is a dependence on technology today that is very different. 20 years ago, time would build value where time is not on your side today. You've got to react very, very quickly, both in terms of the decisions you're making in the business, but also as it relates to kind of responsiveness to the client. 20 years ago, you could focus more on what you love doing, the sticks and bricks, the projects, the kitchen and bath, energy costs, all the what that goes into remodeling and home improvement. However, today you got to be focused on the client experience, the how that they go about buying the project, not just the what. 20 years ago, your focus was very much on the project, where today you really fully need to be more of a therapist, a marriage counselor, and really control the client kind of as a tour guide through this journey because of the proliferation of choices and the overwhelm that they're experiencing. 20 years ago, you could depend on personal referrals, job sites. You could depend on all of those things that, quite frankly, were very, very much of the high touch. However, about a year and a half ago, we had Google come in and speak about, some consumer surveys, and they said something really quite profound, and that is today, homeowners put more value in online reviews than they do personal referrals. Now, that is a game changer for home improvement. For those that aren't focused on the reputation management, aren't focused on the online reviews, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. Because at the end of the day, the personal referral, while it's still important to be client-centric, is not as important as an online review. 20 years ago, homeowners would do projects and you'd create a client for life. However, today, those homeowners out there, whether you like it or not, they look at you as a transaction. They look at you as you've performed a service for them, and it's not necessarily a relationship that goes on and on. You've got to continue to earn the right to get your foot in the door and have a relationship with the client. So this simple chart, when you really look at it, if you're not operating on the today side of the column here, you will probably fall short. So that's really what I encourage. Look at this as a little checklist, and I think you'll be more successful. So let's talk about some of those things that are influencing, I think, remodeling moving into 2018 and beyond. The first is some of the better remodelers out there, the best of the best, are truly looking at the lifetime value. They realize the expense and the cost of the client, so they're really looking at the lifetime value of a client as it's kind of playing out. You can actually almost look at this like a family tree and see the potential return on investment that you're getting from creating that new client from the beginning. As I already stated, online reviews are as or more important than certainly personal referrals. This is true. Just think about this from the point of view. I experienced this certainly more recently when I went out to dinner with my wife and I had 2 or 3 personal referrals of a really good restaurant. She actually went online literally as we were out driving around and determined that the reviews from these restaurants were not as good. Well, needless to say, we didn't end up at that restaurant. So you've got to believe that that is the way people are buying today and making sure that your reputation is top notch. Time is not on your side. Matter of fact, a good friend of mine, Brian Gottlieb, he actually is integrating in time in some of the other, I think, processes and systems of folks that are out there today of making that a value proposition of the speed at which not only you're getting back to someone, the speed at which you're closing it, taking them through the selection process, but also being able to execute the construction. The more that you can make time an element within your business, the more successful you're going to be. Google also shared, I think, an interesting thing. We have a tendency in home improvement to kind of look at the big boxes as being, folks that are out there maybe competing with the home improvement. However, one of the interesting things, those folks out there that are saying, I'm going to do it yourself, as they get involved in the project, they realize that they may research it themselves. They may have some insights about the projects they want to do, but they actually, more than 30% of those actually turn back to the professional. So don't forget about the do-it-for-me folks that are out there. Another interesting thing is you think about, especially the kitchen and bath space, this has got a big influence. Kohler actually did a presentation and a study a couple of years ago, and they actually shared in some of the consumer research that more than 50% of the homeowners out there at the time they did this survey consider themselves germaphobes. We're seeing the cycle at which certain projects get renovated, especially with kitchens and baths, shorten dramatically, while the quality of construction might be just as good, if not better, from 10, 20, 30 years ago. The frequency at which homeowners are renovating these spaces is much faster. And of course, the level of transparency. And transparency is not just in terms of research, but it's also in terms of consumer knowledge. Your homeowners know more about, in many ways, products than you do. They know more about the cost of projects, but they also, in large part because of these online reviews, they know more about you than you do. So it's very important, I think, that you fully understand and you become kind of transparent. As I said before, I truly believe that what we're seeing is more of a science to the remodeling process. The level of data that you have access to today is very, very different than the past. And those companies that are mining the data, they're actually determining in a very targeted way the specific client, not only the specific client, but potentially who on your team would be the most appropriate to serve that client and what the hot buttons will be. All that data is really existing today, and you need to, I think, be aware of it and start to leverage it. So the reality is all home improvement businesses are not created equal. For more than 30 years ago, I was involved in my organization, and I just thought everybody kind of cared about the same thing. But that's not true. You have folks that are very entrepreneurial out there. You have folks that are very investment driven and profit driven. You have folks that are, caring more about the business and the long-term effect, almost like the patient is the business in this case. And then you have folks that it's all about the legacy. It's all about the next generation in the business. But you need to determine, if you're going to predict and position yourself for the future, you need to determine, number one, what kind of motivations do you and the leadership within your organization have? But then from there, you can start to think about and define growth. Growth comes in a lot of different fashions and forms for business. Is it top line growth, i.e. your overall sales year to year? It could be your market share. Now, most remodelers have a fairly small market share. However, manufacturers and distributors track market share very carefully. Now, market share can be a very important metric to keep an eye on if, in fact, you want to kind of make yourself a little bit more sustainable in a down market. So that might be your growth motivation. Another one might be your portfolio blend. The reality is most better businesses out there don't want all their eggs in one basket. So as a result of that, part of your growth might be diversification and looking at that. Another way to look at growth is your brand, your brand and your reputation in terms of the growth. Your team. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of team in a minute here, but that's an element of growth. Certainly profitability, client experience. All these things are really critical to grow your business. So I really want to kind of emphasize, and I'm going to take a moment and hand it back to Michelle, but you need to think about not only what your motivations are for growth, but you need to define the growth and get alignment within your team of how you're defining growth, and obviously it can come in many different fashions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So we're going to take a quick water break, and we want to ask you if you'd like a copy of Mark's book, Fit to Grow. If you do, please say yes. And we ask that if you request this book, that you do it in exchange for a brief conversation about your digital marketing with Surefire. So take a moment here, select your answer, and then we will let Mark continue on. All right. Back to you, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So taking kind of all these environment issues and stars and plans, as I said, there's a fairly good tailwind out there in businesses today. But, as I use these metaphors not to be clever, but, a tailwind can be great. However, a tailwind can be a little dangerous if you're not careful. It can push you too fast, and it can have you go out of control as well. So it's important, I think, to start to begin to kind of unpack some of these parts and pieces and think about what to do in the future. Now, what I like to do in predicting and positioning for the future, especially for 2018, is to try to look at your business and try to think about it in terms of the parts. So I'm going to unpack each one of these. I'm going to talk a little bit about the product. I'm going to talk about the team. I'm going to talk about your client and technology, and then we're going to talk about the importance of strategic alliances as you kind of position yourself. And by looking at it in terms of these parts, it's no different than like going to school and looking at kind of the grades and how you measure up in these different courses. It really allows you to put kind of a focus of where do you need a tutor, where do you need to spend more time. So let's talk a little bit first about product. So the first thing is, I think you need to understand and kind of see that at the end of the day, the home is in fact the patient. The homeowner is the guardian. And I think the reality is it is their most important asset. So by changing that paradigm a bit and thinking about the home as the patient, you are in fact the kind of doctor, so to speak, to the home, but the homeowner is the kind of the parent, so to speak, of that particular patient. So you've got to advise them, but you've got to go in thinking about the product in a much, much more holistic and healthy way. The second thing I think is thinking about your product, as I said earlier, is you need to think about your product not just in terms of what you're doing, but in terms of how you're doing it. You will increase your close rate 5 or 10 points just by focusing on speed and time. With the wealth effect, with kind of the dynamic that's happening out there with this tailwind, the faster that you can get things to clients, the faster that you can come to closure, the faster you can keep them out of limbo land, the better the results will be. Also, you think about your product. Think about some of the project shifts that we're starting to see out there. In the past, certainly many of the energy-related things and many of the aging in place were kind of fad-type projects where we're seeing those today with many businesses being much, much more viable to integrate into your portfolio. We're also seeing kind of a shift, a longer-term shift in terms of what's happening in terms of electric automobiles and some of the different accessibility kind of things that are out there that are affecting. Kitchen and bath projects will in fact continue to be, I think, the most popular projects out there, both because of the frequency, but also because of the kind of stylistic nature of it. I think that many people see it more as fashion changes more than functional changes, so that's going to create, but you're going to see some differences. This is not just the family hub anymore. This is also the command center and the technology centers of the home with the kitchens and certainly baths. So the connectivity I think we're going to see within the home is going to be dramatically different. Your team, I think your team is your greatest asset, but you need to be focused, I think, more than ever in terms of how you're positioned, that, it's so critical that you have all A players on your team. If you have a BC player, it's going to pull the rest of the A players down. So investing in the team, investing in terms of what you're doing in terms of training and energy, all those things in terms of the team, as well as recruitment of the team is going to be critical. But what's most important, and this is where I think the leadership and how you need to get positioned, is try to be more aligned in terms of how you're rowing together and how you're moving together as a team. More than ever, this is in fact a team sport. You've got to deputize every member of the team to be marketers. You've got to have them be problem solvers in different types of the business, and really get them to the point where they're finding, I think, efficiencies and effectiveness. More than ever, team sport is not just kind of a business cliche anymore. It's really an integral part. A friend of mine, Charlie Chase, at a Harvard meeting about 5 or 6 years ago, said something pretty profound, and that was, those companies that master the labor are going to be the winners. And I remember when he said that, I really thought about that word, master the labor. Master the labor was not necessarily about owning the workers or the workforce. Master the labor has got really a lot more legs to it. And as you think about some of the keys to mastering the labor, you've got to really focus on mastering labor from a cultural point of view. I mean, you're seeing some pretty major demographic changes, and what, the millennials really care about in your business is very different than necessarily the baby boomers. So you've got to really be focused on the culture and how people are feeling within working with your company and the business. You got to be focused on new and creative ways for recruitment, leveraging many of the technologies. You've got to make, and the better companies out there are making retention of the employees one of the key elements. Think about this in terms of the level of churn and the level of lack of retention you have in the expense. Training within your business is an investment, not an expense. In a recent survey that I did with some remodelers out there, those companies that are investing more into training are seeing more returns. It's not an expense, it's more of an investment. And then lastly, I think you think about the labor force, you've got to expand it to a bigger universe than just the immediate team members. Your strategic alliances, your mechanical trades, your different suppliers, they're all part of your team, and then start to really have, I think, a holistic view of what the labor is going to be is really critical. But I think one of the things you're not going to see moving forward is a prediction. So many people talk about, what we need to do is change kind of the immigration kind of situation. We got to let more immigrants in, or we have to, get our youth to become more part of the workforce out there. The reality is that those are long-term solutions. It might be 10, 20-year shifts. What you need to do is find better ways of doing things when it comes to the labor. Using products that save time, training your people to save time, using different techniques when it comes to your team members to really squeeze more out of your effectiveness and efficiencies, not necessarily get more warm bodies if you're going to be successful. So the number 3 kind of pillar I want to talk about is your client. The level of data out there today when it comes to the homeowner and your client is unbelievable. The technologies are there. certainly having conversations with the friends here at Surefire Local, I think, will help you at least see what the possibilities are in terms of the level of data that's out there. But that data is right at your fingertips. Today more than ever, you need to know not only who the clients are, because birds of a feather, as my old chief marketing officer said, kind of fly together. You need to align, I think, find out who are your clients, and then pair them up with the right kind of people, and all that data is out there with your clients. You also need to think about the demographic shifts. Most companies have built their business around baby boomers or folks of a little bit more mature generation. But the reality is when you look at some of the key numbers, there's a larger generation with the millennial generation that's really moving forward into the marketplace. Fine, they're starting a little bit later in terms of renovation of the home, but selling to that generation is going to be different than selling to the baby boomers, which is a very high-touch kind of group that's out there. As you think about this, go back and do some analysis, and I think you'll find that that will be the case. But in the very near future, you're going to have 30-40% of your clients really be 30-something or 40-something rather than the 50-60. And also, I think as your client, you got to really look at the value of your client, the lifetime value of your client. Think about, as they're moving forward, what can we do to really increase the level of spend, have it be more client-centric, and really what do I need to do to generate more revenues from them? The number 4 kind of piece of this puzzle is the technologies. The technologies, more than ever, I think are greater than they've certainly been in the past, and therefore you have to invest time and money into the technology. The sales process is dramatically changing. One of the predictions that I'm making, and it's something that, some key companies out there are looking, is that old kitchen table sales process that's happened in the past is very, very quickly changing. It's changing to more of an online interactive kind of process. It's not just about technology tools, but it's also about saving time, saving energy, both for the client as well as for you. There are many models out there of companies that are not necessarily remodeling companies that are actually changing some of the ways they're doing business when it comes to the technologies. Many people not too long ago really thought that buying and purchasing most of the things online or the Amazon effect was going to be that big a deal, or in fact that taxis were going to become, secondary to Ubers in many markets. But this is happening very fast, and it's going to happen, in my prediction, in the selling process in the home as well. This level of transparency, it's hard to say exactly what it's all going to mean, but I think it's going to change the fundamental processes within your business because of the exposure that homeowners are going to have. The 5th leg of the kind of the stool here, so to speak, is strategic relationships. I think it's way, way too complex to think of your business as an isolated little business out there. You've got to start to think more synergistically. And when you think more synergistically, you've got to realize that the manufacturing community, certainly the technology community, the distribution community, these are all allies, not competitors to you. And once you start to see those parts and pieces fit together, I think you're going to see a lot more success. These allies out there are going to be your universities. They're going to be your source. They're going to be insights in terms of data and direction that will help drive your business. So moving forward here, I think as we think about the future of the remodeling industry and future of sales, we need to focus really also on you. Focus on you. Because at the end of the day, I think how you're positioned for the future will have a bigger influence than almost anything else. So just like with the other format here I've been talking about, the first is you've got to see yourself as kind of the voice of reason. Your clients out there have a proliferation and access to so many things out there, but they don't have you. They don't have that voice. You have to be the one to be that tour guide, to be the voice of reason, to really guide the client through, not stepping in the potholes or being overwhelmed and being paralyzed. And I think if you see yourself not just as the construction expert or the designer or the roofer or the window expert, and see yourself as a voice of reason, I think you're going to position yourself more effectively moving forward. The next thing as you think about yourself is your own learning curve. You have to become a student of success. If you're not a student of success, there's no question that you're going to fall behind. These technologies are moving so fast, and you have to invest in yourself just as much as you invest in your team and certainly your clients. And you also have to keep all this in check and in balance. What's happened, I think, as we look kind of in up to 2017 and 16 before, what's happened is as things have moved faster and faster, we've been focused kind of looking at the hood of the car. We're not looking out to the horizon. We're not keeping things in balance in terms of really looking at the short, medium, and long term. We're not focused in terms of balancing our product and with our clients. And by keeping all that in check and balance, I think you're going to be more valuable not only to the company, but you're going to be more successful moving forward. So before we kind of wrap up, and we have some time that you can ask some questions here, I really want to highlight a couple of key things. One is time. As I said earlier before, time is not on your side. If you're not making time a top priority, if you're not looking at your time and becoming more masterful at time as a top priority, we're all dealt the same 24 hours a day, but the difference between the most successful, the most effective is what we do with the time, not necessarily that we have it and work hard. The second is you've got to adjust and change. And going back to those earlier slides, if you're not operating on the today, 2018 kind of side of the equation, if you're kind of living in the past, this is the way you've done it in the past, therefore it should work in the future, you will become irrelevant. And I see this more and more moving forward. The second thing is technology. Many of those kind of evangelists or speakers out there have been talking for a long time. Technology will revolutionize the remodeling industry. Well, it already has. It already has. Technology is the future. You've got to realize, but you've got to keep it in check and in balance. You've got to balance the high tech and the high touch. Don't let your clients kind of become strangers just because you're trying to be more efficient and not necessarily more effective. Be also that student of success. And I think if you can, in fact, invest more time and energy and have some deep thought in terms of what it does the future look like and what do you need to be to do to successful, those answers are really going to become clear. So in closing, I think you really have a choice. I think the reality is, as I've said before, there is a tailwind here. These stars and planets that I talk about, they're aligned very nicely for a future in not only 2018, but 2019. And as you think about this choice that you have, you can kind of watch things happen, you can wonder what happened, or you can put the stake in the sand and you can get out there and make it happen. There's so many, I think, folks out there that are really experiencing well into the double-digit growth, seeing record profitability, and that's a product of those really putting the stake in the sand and making it happen. So that's really what I would encourage. 2018 is going to be a very, very strong year, but you have a choice. You have a choice to make it a great year, a good year, or an okay year. And I just would encourage, work hard, make it a make-hay year, and make it as good as you can be. Thank you so much. I want to turn it back over to Michelle. And again, we can take a couple of questions before this webinar is over.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Before we move on to the Google Home Mini giveaway and the closure of the webinar, we want to take another quick poll and ask if you would like a copy of Mark's book, Fit to Grow. And we ask that if you request this book, that you do it in exchange for a brief conversation about your digital marketing with Surefire. Actually, we did have a question come through. So what is the definition of business fitness, and how do we get our business fit? I guess they want a more detailed description of what that is.
It's a great question. The reality is that 9 out of 10 home improvement contractors kind of got into this business because they had some passion. Passion maybe about the house, passion about starting a business, maybe passion just about getting out there and helping clients. They didn't really know what a business was or how fit it was. Matter of fact, oftentimes they got out and did little projects for someone, and before they knew it, kind of the quicksand was up to the chest, and they looked at each other, looked at their spouse, and said, I've just started a business. I realized that a few years ago, and as a result of that, I wrote a book, How Fit Is Your Business, as an attempt to try to isolate what that might look like and feel like. And I draw the parallel to personal health and fitness because that's something that we grew up learning about. Our parents taught us what it was in terms of the right things to eat. We got out and did exercise and learned about those fitness kind of things in school. We even go to the grocery store and they tell you not only the ingredients in the food that we bought and what the proportion sizes are. So we're bombarded and we kind of take for granted personal health and fitness. So what I did with the business is I actually created 10 criteria within a business, which includes things like team and product and profitability and knowing your numbers. But it also includes things like positioning and reputation. And what you do with this fitness checkup or in reading this book is you actually go through kind of chapter by chapter and you score the business based on it. And what it does, just like going to the doctor and getting your cholesterol checked and blood pressure checked, it helps you to kind of see what those scores are and where you need to improve. And just like going to, let's say, a school where you get 3 A's, a B, and a D, what this does is it isolates where you need the tutor and where you need to improve. So the bottom line is, what is business fitness? It's really just like with your personal health. It's not just one thing. It's a collection of 10 things that you need to look at, just like it does with your personal health, and then you can determine how fit you are and how successful you'll be from there.
Great. All right, so I think we're going to close the poll up, and then we'll move on to the Google Home Mini winner. All right, so today's lucky recipient of the Google Home is Dana La Liberte. Congrats, Dana. Please email marketing@surefirelocal.com with your full mailing address, and we will ship that right out to you. Before we close out, we actually had another question come through that, Mark, if you don't mind answering. With all the media companies out there, Google, Yelp, Yellow Pages, Facebook, Pinterest, do we need help or do we need to dip into all of them?
I would say, the reality is I think you need a tour guide. You need a sage. You need an advisor. And, whether it is your, media company or digital marketing company that you're working with presently, you should have an ongoing relationship and dialogue, with the digital marketing group. On a more specific level, since obviously, what I talk about and what I do is supported by Surefire Local, I would certainly encourage you to, make a list of those kind of questions, have a conversation, with the folks here at Surefire, and I think you'll glean certainly some of the insights. But it's changing very fast. So, I just had a conversation with someone, matter of fact, this morning about House. And I actually, have been involved in House that have, in terms of some of their leadership, and Liza Hausman's a great, great person. And the reality is that even the effectiveness of something like that, it's not just do it, it's how you do it, and it also is something that changes. I remember 3 years ago or 4 years ago, the effectiveness of lead generation within certain categories, was okay, where today it's much, much better because, consumers are really using some of these tools differently. So the more that you're current and kind of in the wave, so to speak, in terms of some of your knowledge in this area, the better. And quite frankly, I think the only way to be that is have a partner with a digital marketing relationship.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for all the questions. And thank you again, Mark, for joining us today. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you to all of our attendees. Please be sure to join us for more upcoming webinars. For details on that, you can check out our newly updated website, surefirelocal.com. We have a link at the top of our homepage for the webinar that's occurring the following week. And I want to mention one last time, just in case you stepped away during the polls, we are giving away Mark's book, Fit to Grow, in exchange for a brief conversation with us. So if you are interested, please email marketing@surefirelocal.com. Also, please take a minute to fill out the survey at the end and let us know how we did today and what topics you would like to hear about in the future. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon.